Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers pretextual stops, detainment during a traffic stop, and impersonating a public servant, and comes to us from the Ocala Post's channel, but was originally uploaded by Tony Soto's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. Before we dive into the interaction, I want to give a shout out to Total AV for sponsoring this video. On average, 1 in 3 Americans will be affected by online attacks. And in 2018 alone, hackers managed to steal 500 million personal records. If you've ever had a virus or malware infect your computer before, you know how devastating it can be. And finding cyber protection that is both affordable and effective has always been a challenge. Until now. Total AV is a premier antivirus software that offers scheduled scans and real-time protection that constantly monitors your computer and automatically detects potential threats while surfing the web, downloading files, or sorting through email attachments. Total AV also offers advanced optimization tools to help improve your device's battery life and speed. Given their dedication to customer service, privacy, and security, it is no wonder that Total AV is the #1 ranked antivirus protection on Google. And best of all, it's incredibly affordable. Right now, you can save 70% off Total AV's retail price and get a 1-year package for only $29.99. That's less than $3 a month. So try it out for yourself using my custom link in the description below and get that 70% discount while you can. Thanks again to Total AV for sponsoring this video. On March 25th, 2015, 28-year-old Philadelphia resident Tony Soto was stopped by Philadelphia police officer Holloway near the 6700 block of Torresdale Avenue, just outside of the Philadelphia metro area. This interaction has a strange and somewhat somber ending, so I encourage you to watch to the end of the video.
All right, you said tinted windows, right? That's the reason why you stopped my vehicle?
Tinted windows.
All right, I'll have a tint permit from the state of PennDOT. That's what I'm going to show you first. That invalidates your traffic stop, sir. All right, what's your second reason?
Your headlights, sir.
My headlights, what? What's wrong with my headlights?
Your headlight is out.
Oh, no, it's not. Both my headlights are on.
But I can still see your paperwork.
Well, no, you can't. You'll see the tint permit and you'll see my identification, but you won't see the vehicle registration because your traffic stop is invalidated. I'm going to return it.
No.
In 1979, the Supreme Court held that officers must have probable cause that a violation has occurred in order to stop a vehicle for a license and registration check, in the case of Delaware versus Prowse. Nearly 20 years later, the Supreme Court stood by that notion in what could be considered a sister precedent to the Prowse ruling in the 1996 case of Wren versus United States. In the Wren case, the court rejected the notion that subjective intentions of police officers play a role in stops initiated with probable cause. Here's an excerpt from the unanimous opinion reached by the court, read by Justice Scalia.
Petitioners do not dispute that the police had probable cause to believe that they had violated the D.C. traffic code. Instead, they advance a new argument that in the unique context of civil traffic regulations, probable cause is simply not enough. Automobile use, they say, is so heavily and minutely regulated that total compliance is nearly impossible. Almost all motorists frequently commit technical violations. The danger of approving all traffic stops based on probable cause, they claim, is that it creates a temptation for the police to use traffic stops as a means of investigating other law violations, as to which no probable cause exists, and enables the police to single out disfavored groups for unwelcome police attention. For this reason, petitioners argue, the Fourth Amendment test for traffic stops should be not simply whether probable cause existed to justify the stop, but rather whether a police officer acting reasonably would have made the stop for the reason given. In earlier cases, we have effectively rejected the notion that the constitutionality of traffic stops depends upon the actual motivations of the individual officers involved.
Although the defense made a compelling argument in regards to the impossibility of motor vehicle compliance, the court denounced the notion that a reasonableness test was sufficient for determining the legality of an officer's actions, and ruled that the subjective intentions of an officer have no bearing on the legitimacy of their probable cause. This ruling paved the way for pretextual traffic stops, and essentially encouraged officers to zealously enforce petty traffic traffic laws in an effort to seek out more serious crimes. It's important to mention pretextual stops because many questions have been raised about the officer's intent before this stop occurred. Many critics of Officer Holloway's conduct have argued that Mr. Soto was stopped because of his affiliation with certain activist groups, which we will discuss later in the video. Officer Holloway was well within his authority to stop Mr. Soto for his tint and headlight, but the legal seizure of Mr. Soto became illegal once Mr. Soto had dispelled the officer's suspicions by presenting the medical exemption paperwork for the tint and proving that his headlights were in fact functioning properly. Although each ruling is highly circumstantial, many courts have held that officers may not continue to detain an individual once their suspicions have been satisfied and no criminal activity is afoot.
Once I see your paperwork, you don't tell me whether my stop is valid or not.
I'm telling you right now, Officer Holloway.
Huh? Okay.
All right. Here's the sir. You don't have the right to open my door. This car has video monitoring,
I'll
just
see
so you know.
Your video.
Okay, you don't have the right to open my door, sir. You're violating my constitutional right now.
Step out the vehicle.
Sir, I don't have to step out the vehicle.
I'll see your video monitor.
For my safety and your safety, I'm going to sit in this vehicle and I'm requesting your supervisor now.
You can request a supervisor.
All right, let me give you my paperwork for the vehicle. Well, my temp permit and my identification. That's number one. My driver's license, this is number one. All right. Fire marshal identification, that's number two. And badge to go with it. All right.
Here, Mr. Soto presents a fire marshal ID and badge and displays it along with his identification to the officer. It wasn't until after Mr. Soto posted the video of this interaction that the Philadelphia Police Department discovered that the badge was fake and that Mr. Soto was not a fire marshal. Upon further investigation, the PPD also discovered that Mr. Soto had a prior conviction for impersonating a police officer from 2008. And 3 years after that arrest, Mr. Soto was arrested again for impersonating a police officer. But the case was eventually dismissed because Pennsylvania's impersonating a public servant code is a little different from most states. Pennsylvania Code 4912 states that a person commits a misdemeanor of the second degree if he falsely pretends to hold a position in the public service with intent to induce another to submit to such pretended official authority. Unlike most states, Pennsylvania requires an individual to benefit from impersonating a public figure before it is considered a crime. Mr. Soto was never charged for presenting the fake fire marshal badge to Officer Holloway, and it is unlikely that charging Mr. Soto under Code 4912 would hold up in court. But it does raise valid ethical questions about Mr. Soto's conduct during this interaction, and in the past.
And I'm requesting a supervisor. Can you call for your supervisor, sir?
Yes, I did, sir.
Thank you.
I'm trying to do my job.
Can you shut my door, please? Oh yeah, that's accurate too. That's who I work for, just so you know.
That's fine.
We're gonna stop all this nonsense with you guys down here just stopping people and doing whatever you want. So that's done.
Turn your high beam on now.
You said my high beams?
Your high beams.
Okay. Go ahead. All right, not a problem. Second suggestion is that my vehicle headlights, one of my headlights was off. Sound like similar to the Brandon Tate-Brown issue, you know, but both my headlights are functioning properly. Requested a supervisor at 728.
At this point, Mr. Soto has more than satisfied the officer's suspicions, and Officer Holloway has no authority to continue detaining him. Mr. Soto mentions that this interaction is unfolding similarly to the Brandon Tate-Brown incident, which is referring to a controversial 2014 police shooting of 26-year-old Brandon Tate-Brown, of which officers were cleared of any wrongdoing. Mr. Tate-Brown was killed by officers of the 15th District in Philadelphia, which is the same district that Officer Holloway and his partner are assigned to. Prompted by Mr. Tate-Brown's death, Mr. Soto became heavily involved in the civil rights activism community and claimed that he was already known and disliked by the PPD before this interaction took place.
And refused to give him the paperwork to the vehicle because the state of Pennsylvania, for the reason why he's stopping me, invalidates his traffic stop for stopping a vehicle just for the sole purposes of sunscreening, in which PennDOT, I have a PennDOT exemption.
Thank you. I have work for that today. You can stop it for the sole purpose of vehicle 104523.
Oh, you can stop, but once I present paperwork to you invalidating the traffic stop, I showed it to you. You refused to look at it.
You didn't give me I wasn't stepping into your vehicle.
You don't have to step in. I can hold it right here, and you can flash your flashlight. I'll do it again.
Tell me what I can see, sir.
I can tell you whatever I want because you're a public servant and you work for me. I pay my taxes.
At all.
You pay. I pay. Look, I pay my taxes. You work for me.
I don't work for you at all, sir.
You work for me.
I'm glad
Well, tonight you work for me, Officer Holloway.
I'm glad you think
All right.
so.
That's why you're standing there waiting for your supervisor, and I'm sitting here.
And I'm perfect.
All right.
$40, sir.
It's not a problem. And I'll be down here all day and every other day after that, and every time you stop me.
Absolutely fine.
Here we go. Sunscreen and permit again, just so you can see.
Well, I haven't seen it. You can show
All right.
me whatever camera
Here you
show
go.
it to.
Here's the seal from state of Pennsylvania right here. Do me a favor.
Officer Holloway snatches the paper through the window and spends over 2 minutes reading the exemption and getting the paper soaked by the rain. After handing the paper back to Mr. Soto, Officer Holloway hovers over the car for a moment and then returns to his patrol car. Mr. Soto continues to wait in his car for the officer to return, but after several minutes of sitting, he realizes that the officers have abandoned the traffic stop. The officers backed their car up and drove around the corner without telling Mr. Soto that he was free to go, or letting him know that the stop was concluded in any way. Mr. Soto then gets out of his vehicle and films the officers for a moment before they decide to drive away without further incident. Mr. Soto posted the interaction on YouTube the following day, and it immediately went viral, adding to Mr. Soto's reputation as an activist. Following this interaction, Mr. Soto filed an official complaint against Officer Holloway and had several other police encounters, one of which also went viral, and he began to gain a small following on Facebook and YouTube. But on May 18th, 2016, Mr. Soto was arrested once again for impersonating a police officer, assault, and pulling a gun on an off-duty Philadelphia officer. Mr. Soto was issued a $900,000 bond and has been in jail since. Mr. Soto's mother created a Facebook page called Justice for Tony Soto in the months following his arrest, but it appears as though it has since been acquired by another entity, as Mr. Soto's mother passed away from cancer the following year. Mr. Soto had been her primary caregiver until he was arrested. The page's About section features a relatively detailed letter explaining Mr. Soto's prior offenses, as well as his use of fake badges, and presents Mr. Soto as a victim of syndicated police misconduct and harassment. Some of the letter's points seem plausible, and it is worth the read. Mr. Soto's last video on YouTube would come nearly 1 year after his arrest, and it appears to have been filmed while he was incarcerated. The video consists of a nearly 15-minute rant that incoherently shifts from a church sermon to a motivational speech and back again several times. After spending 2 years in jail, the charges against him were dismissed on speedy trial grounds, but then reinstated by the district attorney with a much lower bond of $75,000. But Mr. Soto remains in jail. A GoFundMe account was set up to help pay Mr. Soto's bond, but was shut down by GoFundMe without explanation. The Philadelphia Police Department released a statement claiming that the officers did nothing wrong, and questioned the validity of Mr. Soto's window tint medical exemption. Overall, Officer Holloway and the Philadelphia Police Department get an F for illegally detaining Mr. Soto after he dispelled the officer's probable cause, and for abandoning the traffic stop without any explanation or due diligence. The irregular and unprofessional nature of Officer Holloway's conduct cannot be understated, and the fact that the Philadelphia Police Department defended his actions is disturbing. In early 2015, the Fraternal Order of Police posted an alert warning officers and civilians that Mr. Soto was a quote-unquote fraud who attempted to bait police into misconduct, adding merit to the notion that this interaction was a pretextual stop. Either way, Officer Holloway's conduct was inexcusable and most likely illegal, and no department should condone such behavior from its officers. Mr. Soto gets a C, because although he was within his rights to deny the officer his registration, repeatedly impersonating public officials for any reason is highly unethical, especially during a police encounter. Because Mr. Soto was able to cultivate a social following to back his work as an activist, he bore a burden of social responsibility that is greater than the average individual, and wielded that responsibility and influence recklessly by impersonating a fire marshal during this encounter. Mr. Soto's actions had the potential to damage civil rights activism as a whole, pull because he actively took on the role of representing a sect of that movement, and then conducted himself in a way that reflected badly on the community. Ultimately, Mr. Soto's style of activism resulted in his incarceration. But other than falsely claiming to be a fire marshal, he handled himself relatively well throughout the encounter, and I commend him for his calm and collected demeanor. There are many layers to Mr. Soto's story that I was not able to cover in this video, and I highly suggest taking a deeper look into it yourself. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to cover in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more police interaction content.
This will be the last message I'll record, because you will witness the power of God, and you will witness that God does not forget about his children.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
That there's no other name under heaven by which men should be saved but by the name of Jesus Christ. And that stone that's sitting in front of that tomb in your life, in my life, is going to be rolled away. Because the stone that was in front of Jesus' tomb was rolled away on that Sunday morning. He's not here, he is risen. Don't look for me here.